And now we have quite a good amount of time to try to answer some questions. There were numerous of these that were put into the chat, and our colleagues in EMSA and in here in MOVE, they've been trying to prepare the replies. So maybe we can start taking some important questions and answering them orally to the extent we have time for this. There was one question that is important that I will answer now, is asking about the official publication of the monitoring plans and also of the compliance report. So this will be included in implementing acts that we've been preparing in the last few months. They went through a number of consultation mechanisms, including a public consultation in April, and we received quite a number of comments and feedback from stakeholders. So these will be finally adopted and published in all languages at the end of June and early July. This will happen on the official journal of the European and also we will be putting them on the DG Move and EMSA website when they are out. So again, end of June, early July, you will have the monitoring plans and also some further other standard plans for the reports that will have to be published and submitted later on. There's been several questions that goes into the subject of the regulated entity. Who is the regulated entity under the FuelEU? And we got this question many times, and it is a very important one. So what we can say briefly is that the regulated entity under the FuelEU regulation is always the ISM company, always the entity that is responsible for the ISM code. In practice, this can be either the ship owner or any other entity than the ship owner who is responsible for the management of the ship. If the ship owner is responsible for the ISM code, then automatically it falls on the ship owner to be responsible for the FuelEU. But in cases when it's not the ship owner who's holding the ISM license, but it's another entity, somebody who's managing the ship, then the FuelEU responsibility automatically lies with that ISM company. So it is different than in ETS, but there are reasons for this, since the ETS is a company-based regulation and the FuelEU is a ship-based regulation. So that's why the differences are existing. And what is important to say is that there should be contractual provisions between all parts involved in the operation and the management of the ships, so they can be used to cover relevant liabilities that are relating to compliance with the FuelEU regulation. So this is always very important to keep in mind, this difference in the regulated entity between the FuelEU and ETS. I give the floor maybe to Ricardo. I'm sure you'll be able to answer a number of questions that relate to pooling, to calculating emissions.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. I've bundled up some questions into three groups. One, the flexibility mechanisms. The other, the fuel certification provisions, which fuels can be or not considered eligible under FuelEU. And then a third group on zero emissions at berth. So there are a few more questions, but then I think also more detailed aspects of the TETIS monitoring plan submissions I will pass on to colleagues in EMSA. But I will focus on these three groups. First, the flexibility mechanisms, the possibility to bank compliant surplus, the possibility to borrow compliant surplus from following years, or the possibility to pool or to enter into pooling arrangements. A large part of the questions focus on pooling and how pooling will be performed, who can do pooling, and will there be a cost to participate in a pool? So all these questions are not, you cannot find a direct a reply in the FuelEU regulation. So FuelEU establishes the essential elements for pooling to work, how pooling can be registered in the database, how pooling can be used to comply. But of course, there will be in a pool always ships that are overperformant and other ships that need the pool in order to comply with the FuelEU regulation. It is, of course, subject to private agreements between companies when different companies are involved in a pool to establish the conditions or agree with the conditions to participate in a pool. Of course, this can involve financial compensations, this can involve specific arrangements which are not regulated by FuelEU. In any case, it is important in terms of the timeline, as it was presented by colleagues in EMSA, that pooling is determined in accordance to the provisions of the regulation. However, of course, the governance of the pool, how the companies interact, how the companies establish the pooling arrangement in advance, because of course the timeline is tight in order to decide on a pool. It is normal that there are already pre-agreements and that may be pre-agreements between the companies. So pooling will naturally be dependent on private agreements between companies, or within the ships of the same company, it is a simplified arrangement. Whether pooling and banking can be used in case of a ship that is significantly over-compliant, some of its compliant surplus units can be used in the pool, but if there is still a positive compliance balance, this can be used to bank and use in next year. So it is possible for a ship that is over compliant or that has a positive compliance balance that he uses some of its surplus in a pool and some of its surplus banked for following years. If a ship borrows compliance from following years, the target for compliance in the next years is aggravated, in the same way that when you ask or you borrow money from a bank, you pay an interest. In the case of the FuelEU, this is a similar concept. If you borrow compliance surplus that you need to comply, in the next year, you will have an aggravated target to comply with. The flexibility mechanisms are designed to allow all ships not able to comply with technical measures to find ways of complying with FuelEU, but not only, also to reward those that apply strategies of compliance which are more ambitious and involve significant costs. These arrangements, remarkably pooling, is designed to propel and to reward these companies that invest earlier in over-compliant strategies under FuelEU. So now the topic of fuel certification. Some questions were in the direction of whether one or the other fuel would be eligible under FuelEU. How would the eligibility be determined, bunkered in Europe or outside Europe? So for eligibility of fuels under FuelEU, Article 10 of the regulation is the key article to have in mind. The Renewable Energy Directive provides for the sustainability and certification framework for the fuels. And also the revised gas directive will provide an additional certification framework for low carbon synthetic fuels. FuelEU adds a safeguard for certification of biofuels by safeguarding against any food and feed crop biofuels to be able to comply with FuelEU. So biofuels from food and feed crops, even if they are red certified, would not be counted under FuelEU. How does this work in practice? The certification of the fuels, the documented evidence chain from the supply of the fuel to the distribution and bunkering of the fuel for different ships. It is very important that we establish a clear chain custody transfer of documented evidence from the production to the bunkering of the renewable fuels on board, because this evidence, this documented evidence that needs to be supplied with the bunker delivery note, will ultimately be used by the verifier to decide on the compliance of the different fuels that were bunkered. In Europe or outside Europe, the same rules apply, and these are based on the operation of the voluntary schemes and certification companies already operating under the Renewable Energy Directive framework, on which we will add, of course, in due course, the revised gas directive. Biomethane, biogas outside Europe. Some questions were also in the direction of and asking about eligibility of bunkering outside the EU. So yes, if these fuels are certified outside the EU in accordance with the EU framework from the RED or revised gas directive by voluntary schemes, all these fuels will be eligible and be counted under FuelEU. Documented evidence will be the proof of sustainability or an alternative proof of compliance, depending on whether you're bunkering in the EU or outside the EU. We will be issuing guidance on demonstration of certification of these fuels to operators still this year, and this will be guidance to assist you on how to process the relevant document evidence in the context of the certification of the fuels. Bearing in mind, Annex 1 of FuelEU regulation includes an important element that this certification needs to be provided for all parts of renewable fuels supplied to the ship during the reporting period. Even in a blend that is composed by one or more parts of renewable fuels, the sustainability evidence and information needs to be provided for each part in a blend, together with the bunker delivery note. The final element that I've bundled up from some questions is the zero emissions at berth framework. This applies to container ships and passenger ships above 5,000 gross tons. And there are different timelines for the application of the provisions. The first is from 1st of January 2030. These ships under scope will have to connect to onshore power supply in the main EU ports, in the ports covered by the AFIR regulation. This means in practice that for every port stay above 2 hours, OPS needs to be used from these ships, or alternative zero emission technologies. And some of the questions went on the direction of whether batteries could be used at berth. Yes, batteries or energy, electrical energy supplied by the batteries can be used at berth as an alternative to OPS, bearing in mind, of course, that the total energy used must be sufficient to cover the whole stay of the ship at berth and to cover the power demand throughout the operating profile of the ship at berth. Having said that, these batteries can either be charged at sea, or they can be charged at any charging facility. The important thing is that when they are used, they provide for zero emissions at berth from the ships using this. Ships using OPS that are not under the scope of Article 6 can also benefit from the connection, because onshore power supply and electricity supplied at berth is supplied with zero carbon intensity from well to tank, and this provides a support towards reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of the energy used on board. We are currently working on operational rules to regulate how request of OPS is made by the ship, how the port replies to the ship, and how all this data will be processed. Of course, there will be advance time notifications for the ships to request OPS, and there will be also protocols to be established by the ports in order to process all data relative to request of OPS and also to technical information for the different ships. I tried, Peter, to cover more or less some scope of questions. Of course, not too much into detail on each one of them, but maybe I would suggest now to pass on to questions more on the system and on the on how monitoring plans will be considered. And so back to you, Peter.
Sure. And then I give the floor to Jose and Caroline to talk about the questions that are focusing on monitoring plan and FuelEU database.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you, Ricardo. Ricardo already explained a bit the OPS information regarding monitoring plan. I will first address the issues related to the workflow under the monitoring plan. So the workflow that we are going to have for the FuelEU Maritime is very similar for what we have under the MRV. There were some questions regarding the outdated status of the monitoring plan that is already happening at the moment for the Thetis MRV. And what the company needs to do, they don't need to resubmit the monitoring plan to the verifier. They only need to click a button saying there is no changes required under the revision process foreseen in the legal acts that requires that the company at least once every year revise the monitoring plan, and if there is no amendments needed, they click the button and say no changes are required and the revision process, and the monitoring plan will stay assessed. So it is a very simple process, unless that in the revision process, one of the amendments that are required will be in the scope of the Article 11.2, as mentioned by Caroline, because there are amendments that requires the reassessment of the monitoring plan, and other that doesn't require it. So that process is just to confirm that the revision process was completed, and if completed and no reassessment is required, it's a very simplified process in the system, but it is a functionality that it is already happening for the MRV scope. The main difference that we have in the workflow is that the monitoring plan will not be submitted for approval by the administering authority, or in this case, the administering state, the member state. So the final status of the monitoring plan is monitoring plan assessed by the verifier. This doesn't mean that the member state won't be able to look at it. They will be able to look at it, but in the workflow of the additional checks report. And in that case, there will be the additional checks report that will be made available. And when that additional checks report are made available for companies and verifier, and when acknowledging the additional checks, then companies and verifiers should react and correct if there is something to correct in the monitoring plan. Regarding what are the new tables, so as already mentioned, we have mainly two tables that will be required to all companies, and that is related, one of them to the emission factors, because for FuelEU is required to all ships to report and to calculate the well-to-tank emissions, that it is outside of the scope of the MRV. So that procedure, companies need to revise to clearly explain what is the procedure to collect and report well-to-tank emission factors, and under the management scope also to explain what it is the procedure to revise all the data in the scope of the FuelEU Maritime. Regarding to the additional tables, as it was explained, most of them are related to derogation. But for example, when we go to the OPS connection, it's not only to the obligation to connect, and there is an obligation to connect kicking in 2030 for the containers and cruise passenger ships, but the additional ships that will want to report OPS energy, and as Ricardo said, for the OPS connections, the well-to-tank emissions factor is 0, so they will have 0 emissions for all energy that is being reported under the OPS. But for the ships to be able to report the amount of energy consumed from the OPS, they should determine and include in the monitoring plan what it is exactly the procedure to account and to monitor and to fill in the data gaps related to the OPS connections. Regarding the sailing in ice, the sailing in ice is also tables for the companies wanting to use and to make use of the derogation foreseen under Annex 4 related to the deduction of energy consumed when sailing in ice. So if a company doesn't report or doesn't report those types of energy or fill in those tables in the monitoring plan, it will not be able to do the use of that type of derogation. So several tables are linked to the options that the companies and the ships will do in using the derogations, but it should not be seen as an additional administrative burdens for the companies that don't intend to use that type of derogations. Regarding the next steps, as I mentioned, during July, we'll have an additional webinar going deep in the new functionalities to submit the monitoring plans. There was a question regarding if they could reuse the information from the MRV, and the reply that they can and they should reuse the information already submitted in the MRV monitoring plan. For example, for the fuel consumption, all the tables related to where it is mentioned in the MRV emission source and under FuelEU is fuel consumers, but all the process to record, monitor, and to fill in data gaps and the procedures, the measurement methods to collect information regarding fuel consumption should be the same procedures, the same methodology to allow for the reporting only once of the fuel consumption. So all the tables that it is mentioned to be common for the MRV, it should be reused to allow the procedure of reporting only once the fuel consumption, as it is foreseen in Annex 1 of the FuelEU regulation. The MRV data should be reused in terms of what it is the fuel consumed on board of the ship. In terms of how you will be able to do it, the process will be very similar to what's happening to the Thetis MRV. You will be able to upload an XML file. It is not available at the moment. We will make it available very close to the publication of the secondary legislation. And we foresee that in early August, we deploy the functionalities for the FuelEU. But before of the deployment, we will have the webinar, we will have, and we have foreseen sharing the XML schema and trying to, and supporting you in the implementation. We understand that the timeline is quite challenging. That's why we will increase the communication activities and how we are going to support you during the next months, trying to facilitate as much the interaction with the TETIS MRV system. There was also some questions related how the companies will be able to create the FuelEU Maritime. When the new functionality will be deployed in the system, and in advance, we will explain that interaction between the companies in the following webinar, where we will be able to go into details what will happen in the system. At the moment, we presented the monitoring plan using mockups. That is also one of the reasons we will do that when we will be able to show you exactly what is in fact happening in TETIS MRV, and that will be done during the month of July. I think I cover almost all the questions on the monitoring plan, and as Peter said, we will do a follow-up and written for any other questions that we weren't able to reply now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jose. We still have a few minutes, so I'll just pick one or two other further questions that were not answered so far. One of them is referring to the treatment of carbon capture and storage, and indeed, currently the regulation is not covering CCS as an option. But we know that this is a technology, this is an approach that is very much interesting for operators. So we will be studying this option. We will be studying the option of using carbon capture and storage to comply with the regulation, and we'll be, for example, launching a work stream, a study group under the European Sustainable Shipping Forum that will look at the use of CCS. And then just to say again that in 2027 there will be a major review of this regulation. The legal text is requiring us to do this review, and then a number of issues can be addressed or can be amended in the text, and one of them could be CCS if the study of the issue prompts us to be able to incorporate it in the regulation. And there was another question about ships that are doing more than 300 trips per voyage, and I must say that truly in the MRV, there's an exemption for reporting per voyage for these ships. There's no such derogation existing in the FuelEU. We understand the administrative burden that the voyage reporting is placing on these ships, and we will be trying to find a solution. We are looking at how the burden could be eased for these ships. But for the moment, what I can say is the FuelEU is clearly requiring a per voyage reporting, and there's no derogation for ships using more than 200 trips. But we're gonna return to this issue hopefully later. There was 2 or 3 questions about offshore, how the FuelEU is, whether it's covering offshore vessels. So the answer to this is yes. Those above 500 gross tons, they fall under the scope of the regulations. Those offshore vessels of 400 gross tonnage and above will be also covered by MRV Maritime Regulation from January 2025. So this potentially could open a possibility to to cover them in the FuelEU regulation, but this will be done in 2027 under the major review. But for ships, for offshore ships above 5,000, they are already covered. I give back the floor to Ricardo. I think he has one or two more issues maybe to raise.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Just two more. One is on the global warming potential to be used on the calculations for FuelEU. There's a question whether this is AR4 or AR5, the assessment report from the IPCC. In the global warming potential values to be used for the CO2 equivalency calculations in FuelEU are those indicated by the Renewable Energy Directive. And this is clearly in Annex 1 of FuelEU. So currently the Renewable Energy Directive is using AR4, but this will in the future, and we have been given indication that already for the beginning of next year, AR5 will be updated into the Renewable Energy Directive. It is important to note that the global warming potential is the one indicated in the Renewable Energy Directive. And this sometimes can lead to often questions about consistency of calculations. So this is an important one. And finally, I have to highlight in respect of also some questions that may be expressing some disappointment about talking about penalties and about flexibility arrangements, and not too much about what can operators really start doing for technical compliance, meaning concretely how to effect energy transition already in the context of FuelEU. And as I said, renewable and low carbon fuels and adequate energy conversion systems are the epicenter for technical compliance with FuelEU. The reward for wind-assisted propulsion is a reward based on installed wind power, but it is an accessory element for compliance. The key element is procuring renewable and low carbon fuels, and it is important to make a note: for the first 10 years you have 2 and 6% of greenhouse gas intensity reduction targets. This can be achieved through using onshore power supply or through minimum amounts of blends for renewable and low carbon fuels. So procuring these blends is key, and ensuring fuel supply contracts to grant this access and purchase of these blends wherever available is also key. So we of course see of great added value that companies procure and seek for availability for these blends to already start introducing some percentage of decarbonized energy into the operation of ships. And therefore, as we go into the future, fuel supply contracts will be key building blocks for ensuring availability of renewable and low carbon fuels for ships. And we are not talking about retrofitting ships, because a large part of these blends can already be blendable into existing traditional oil fuel installations. Remarkably, when we talk about the blendability with marine diesel or marine gas oil based fuel systems. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. Right, so we reached the end of the scheduled time for this webinar. Thank you for your attention and for the many questions that you submitted. Thanks for Jose, Ricardo, and Caroline for the presentation and also for answering the questions. So as I said, we've been recording this webinar. We'll be publish it soon on these two websites, on the EMSA and on the DG Move website. We'll also be answering the questions that we received and publish a document with the answers. And also the help desk is open for your questions to send it to us at any moment. So just as a final thought, indeed, this is a difficult regulation. It is proven by the number of questions and concerns that you are having. But because of this, we will be accelerating our activities to reach out to stakeholders and try to explain you know, different interpretations, different rules, different requirements, so that the compliance will be as smooth and as efficient from your side as possible. So thank you again for your attention, and have a good day.